This video is on conjectures and conditional statements. Now, we've already talked a little bit about conjectures. Remember, a conjecture is just a statement that is believed to be true but has not yet been proven. Now, conjectures can be true or false. Now, sometimes it's easy to tell if a conjecture is true or false. Other times, it's not as easy. Let's take a look at example number 1. Example 1 says, Susan is a new geometry student and she's made a conjecture based on her understanding of some of her new geometry terms. Susan's conjecture is, if points P, Q, and R are collinear, then point Q must be between points P and R. And the question says, is this conjecture true or false? Well, it's not too hard to see that just because these 3 points, P, Q, and R, are collinear, just because they're on the same line, that doesn't necessarily mean that Q has to be between points P and R. In fact, point P might be between point R. And in fact, I can draw a picture that shows an example that proves how this statement is going to be false. In other words, if I draw this picture here, I've got these 3 points, 3 collinear points, and let's say I put point P in between point Q and R. Well, here is a picture of points P, Q, and R. P, Q, and R, they're collinear, they lie on the same line, and point Q is clearly not between points P and R. So if I can give you an example, if I can draw you a picture, give you some kind of example that proves a conjecture to be false, this picture, this example, it's called a counterexample. And that's all a counterexample is. A counterexample is just something that proves a conjecture to be false. Now, a conditional statement is a statement that is in the form if A, then B. Now, you'll notice this statement that we just looked at, this conjecture that Susan made about points P, Q, and R. Notice that this conjecture that she made, it's in the form if A, then B. She says if this, then this. All right, so this section here, we're calling that A, and this section here, we're calling that B. So her conjecture is in the form if A, then B. Well, it turns out that being able to write statements in this form, the if A, then B form, it turns out that's very useful for applying different laws of our different laws of logic. So, conditional statement, it's in the form if A, then B. The part following the if is called the hypothesis. And the part following the then is called the conclusion. So let's take a look at a couple of statements and how we might take those statements and put them into this conditional statement form, if A, then B. Example number 2. For each one of them, it says, write each statement in conditional form, that is if-then form, and identify the hypothesis and conclusion of each conditional. So the given statement is, perpendicular lines form right angles. So if I want to rewrite this statement in the if-then form, perpendicular lines form right angles, I would say, if 2 lines are perpendicular, then they form right angles. If this, then that. If 2 lines are perpendicular, then they form right angles. Now it says underline, or it says identify the hypothesis and conclusion of each conditional. Let me just underline it. The part following the if, this is the hypothesis. The part following the then, that's the conclusion. Notice that the words if and then they're not part of either the hypothesis or the conclusion. The parts of the statement that follows the word if, that's the hypothesis, and the part that follows the word then, that's the conclusion. All right, example number 3. The given statement is a figure with 3 sides is a triangle. I want to write this in if-then form. A figure with 3 sides is a triangle. So if a figure has 3 sides, then it is a triangle. If this, then this. All right, identify the hypothesis and conclusion. Well, the hypothesis is just the part following the if, and the conclusion is the part following the then. Now you've got another example down there, example 4, that I want you to try on your own. And in fact, if you want to pause the video here and try that one before going on, you can do that now. Okay, next we're going to talk about converse statements. Now, we already said that a conditional statement is a statement that's in the form if A, then B. The converse of a particular conditional statement, the converse statement is formed by swapping A and B. That is, swapping the position of the hypothesis and the conclusion. So the converse statement would look like if B, then A. Now, when we're actually dealing with real statements, real conditional statements, those statements are going to be in English, so we don't actually have the A's and the B's here. So let's take a look at a couple of examples in which we are trying to put a statement in conditional form and then form the converse of that statement. So example number 5. For each of these it says write each statement in conditional form and then write the converse, then identify each statement as true or false. Okay, so example 5, the given statement says people who live in Siler City live in North Carolina. So I want to first write that in conditional form, if A then B. People who live in Siler City live in North Carolina, so I would write if, let's say, if someone lives in Siler City, then they live in North Carolina. All right, so that's the conditional statement. Now I want to also write the converse of this statement. Well, remember, to write the converse, I just need to swap the hypothesis and the conclusion. Well, this is my hypothesis. This is my conclusion. Now, since my statement is actually in English, I'm going to do a little bit more than just picking this up and moving it over here, because if I did that, then my statement would read, if they live in North Carolina, then someone lives in Siler City, and that doesn't make sense grammatically. So we're going to have to modify that a little bit just to make it make sense in using English grammar. So my converse statement is going to be, if someone lives in North Carolina, then they live in Siler City. Let's try example 6. Given statement. Oh, we forgot to mark these as true or false. Identify each statement as true or false. Okay. If someone lives in Siler City, then they live in North Carolina. Well, I know this is a true statement because Siler City is a city in North Carolina. So if you live in Siler City, you automatically live in North Carolina. This statement, however, if someone lives in North Carolina, then they live in Siler City, this I know is a false statement because I can give you an example. I live in North Carolina, but I don't live in Siler City. I live in Garner. Just because somebody lives in North Carolina, that doesn't mean that they have to live in Siler City. They could live in a whole bunch of other cities in North Carolina. So that would be a counterexample. The fact that I live in Garner and yet I still live in North Carolina, that's a counterexample which shows that this statement is false. Okay, example number 6. Our given statement, squares have 4 sides, and I want to write this in conditional form, if-then form. Squares have four sides, so if a figure is a square, then it has four sides. So there's my conditional statement. Now I want to also write the converse of this statement, and remember I'm going to have to do a little bit of fiddling with the grammar to make sure that it comes out grammatically correct. I'm going to leave this one for you to finish and also to identify whether each of these statements is true or false. And then you've also got an example number 7. I want you to try that one on your own, and we'll take a look at these tomorrow in class.